Hey, good evening and a warm welcome to everyone who's joining our webinar tonight on the Menopause Mindset. We are so thrilled to have you all here tonight. I am Dr. Ilze Grobler, the Director and Clinical Psychologist of Zest Infusion, and I'm thrilled to introduce my Zesty team members to you tonight. But before we get to the introductions, I just quickly want to do some housekeeping as we wait for all participants to join. We would like to ask you to first just open your chat box on Zoom, if you don't mind. And you will notice that your video and audio are muted. The reason why we've done that is just to reduce any distractions during our presentation tonight, and also to try and minimize any confidentiality issues, and to also support the webinar that will be recorded tonight. So yeah, when you open the chat box, we ask you to share your thoughts and to please engage as actively as you possibly can. So please do that by putting some questions in during the presentation or any comments that you might have. And we will also allow a Q&A at the end of our presentation tonight. So as we have questions coming up throughout the presentation, we've taken notes, thank you so much, of your contributions that you've made when you registered for the webinar tonight, where you've already listed some of the questions that are pressing for you. And we hope that we will be able to answer all of those questions. But if there are any additional questions that come up, please feel free to put them into the chat box. Please address your question to the presenter that you would like to answer your question, by starting your chat with Rachel or Christina or Ilze, and we will that will help us to see your question and to try and respond to that. So thank you very much. I will try to manage all the technology from my end while we're doing the presentation. But let's go over to introducing our esteemed presenters tonight. So on my left is Christina Mailer. Christina is our dietitian and nutritionist on our team. She also is a qualified sports dietitian, and she's also doing some additional training as a credentialed eating disorder clinician. So there's quite a few credentials behind her name. And Christina will be sharing some insightful insights on nutritional aspects of menopause and how that can support our clients and all of you. And then I also have Rachel Wilkinson. Rachel is a psychotherapist on our team. She's also a Reiki master. And she's also very recently introduced a remedial massage therapy service at Zest Infusion. So quite a few interesting things that Rachel is also managing on our team. And alongside that, Rachel also runs some of our group therapy programs, which you will hear more about a little bit later tonight. So I'm so proud of my team, of everything that you all bring to our practice, and I'm so grateful that you have agreed to sit in on this webinar tonight. I think we all feel the nerves. It's the first time that we're running something like this. So please bear with us tonight, and we hope that you will enjoy the presentation and that you will also get a lot of value from it. And I also want to say thank you to our reception admin team, who's also joined the chat box tonight. They will try and help us manage the chats as they come through tonight. So please keep an eye out on the chat box, and reception will be helping to answer those questions. So thank you again for our amazing reception team. I'm so grateful for all of them. Alrighty, so with all the introductions out of the way, I'd like to just start by doing a little bit of an icebreaker question tonight before we transition to our webinar presentation. So I'd like to ask all of you to please share your thoughts in the chat and raise your hand or just put a yes in if you... Sorry, there's more participants trying to join. So please raise your hand or say yes in the chat box if you have already sought advice or some support from a health provider, and that can be any type of health provider regarding menopause-related issues. But it's great to see some answers coming through, a few yeses, a few nos. So yeah, we hope that what you're going to learn from our presentation tonight will also help add some of that additional information that you are seeking, and help to improve your knowledge on the topic. Alrighty, so let's start with our presentation. So I'd like to start by asking Christina if you can share a little bit with us about what happens to our hormones during our life cycle, from a physiological perspective, and just help us understand a little bit about all these different hormones, because estrogen is one of the hormones that we know, but it's clearly not everything.
It's definitely not everything. And thank you so much for having me. And I'm really, I just wanted to start by saying that, this topic regarding women's health and all of the physiological and hormonal changes that occur is really a topic that is important to me. And I think it's really important to for everyone to be aware of their body and help kind of regulate some of those changes and be proficient in gaining advice if some of these things come up.
Yeah, we are all such great advocates of that, for sure.
So I thought I'd start with maybe signaling some of those hormonal changes. So we'll bring this up on the slide for you. So what we tend to see and what we tend to know about our hormones is that we have both our estrogen, as Ilze mentioned, and our progesterone as our main feminine hormones. And this diagram just goes through, I guess, what are the general stages of that hormonal distribution as we go through those general menstruation. And so this tends to be between young ages from 10 or so to around 35 before we start entering into a perimenopause stage. So if we go and have a look at some of the distribution of those changes that happen during the life cycle, what we tend to see is from around age 35, we start to have a bit of changes in some of that hormonal distribution. And one of the key hormones that we tend to see is our estrogen starts to go on a steady decline. We see a fundamental decline in estrogen. However, what we can see upon this graph is there's actually a lot of curvation that happens. So we get quite a number of stretches of increase and decrease. And then as we start to go into more of that menopausal state, usually around age 50, but can be very various for different people, we start to see some of those fluctuations be slightly greater. And this tends to give us much more of those menopausal symptoms that we'll talk about later on. So I guess talking about what the role of estrogen is a good, to give us a bit of an understanding, is estrogen something that helps regulate our menstruation. So that's to help with our reproductive functioning. But it also has a lot of other functions in the body as well. So things like our bone density helps support the bone matrix and that strengthening of the bone. It also helps promote our skin elasticity and hydration of the skin. Helps with our cognitive functioning and our mood as well, and also impacts our cholesterol levels and keeps them at a healthy cholesterol level, so often lowering our what we call our bad cholesterols and increasing some of those good cholesterols naturally. As this starts to decrease over time, what we tend to find, particularly in the perimenopausal state, is that the estrogen levels become quite erratic and it starts to lead to more irregular periods. So sometimes we'll often notice these either being heavier, sometimes lighter. The window of our periods may be shorter, or sometimes they're longer. So this variation becomes quite erratic. And then what we also start to notice when we do go into that menopausal state is that we have a significant drop in that estrogen. And so what we tend to see is a lot of that cognitive and mood changes tends to happen during this time. We also have an increased cardiovascular risk. And so estrogen is a protective agent when it comes to our heart health. And so that's something that we need to consider as our estrogen starts to decline. I think another thing to note as well is sometimes what's not realized is this the type of estrogen that we have actually changes as well. So fundamentally, we have three types of estrogen: estradiol, which is our primary estrogen. It's the one that's produced all the ways through our perimenopause until that menopausal age, and then the type of estrogen starts to change. And we have estradiol, which tends to be the most produced estrogen at that time. We also have estradiol, but that's something that's produced during pregnancy only.
All right.
Okay. And then I guess we can see the changes in progesterone is that next decline. So very similar, I guess, to the estrogen. However, what we may notice is the progesterone actually tends to drop more rapidly than our estrogen. And so we start to see that decline happen first. And that creates more something called estrogen dominance, which what we tend to notice from estrogen dominance is things like having more of our mood tends to change. We also start to have a bit of tenderness. It can be in the breast, or some of that distribution of fat around the body starts to change as a consequence as well. And progesterone is a calming agent for the body as well. So what we also notice is some of that natural calming hormone that occurs starts to kind of diminish a little bit. And that's where we start to notice a little bit more heightened emotions, we might say. Another thing, I guess, when we start to enter into that menopausal state is that our progesterone is minimal and it does become quite absent. So this can lead to some sleep disruptions, as it's that calming agent that tends to help and support our sleep functioning. We can see next testosterone, and it's quite interesting, I guess, a lot of the time when I talk to my patients and clients about testosterone is that we tend to see this as mainly a male hormone, but we don't actually realize women have quite a lot of testosterone. And in fact, there is more molecules of testosterone in the female body than there is estrogen. It just the fact that we have the estrogen there and it is higher than males tends to be why we kind of consider testosterone as more of a male hormone, but in fact we do have quite a lot of it, and it does impact us through these cyclic stages as well. So one of the, I guess, some of those functions of testosterone that's good to note kind of during this time is that it helps support our libido, so that's our sex drive, and it also contributes to our muscle strength and our bone strength and our overall vitality and our energy levels. So as we can see a gradual decline that starts to occur as well, some of these symptoms actually come from those hormonal fluctuations also. During those menopausal stages, we do see that gradual decrease in the testosterone levels, and so we may experience some of that fatigue, but we also, what we might not note is that there's some muscle mass that tends to be lost as a result, which is around that 5 to 8% each decade.
Wow.
Our last hormone that we've referenced here, which I think is quite important, is our melatonin. And so melatonin is really important for helping our wake and sleep cycles, so our circadian rhythm. And it also helps with our antioxidant and immune functioning. So as we start to see some of that decline, we may experience some more of those sleep disturbances. So things like having insomnia or often wakes in the night. And it can also impact our bone health as well. So going back to some of that bone matrix.
Christina, it's so interesting. It's starting to make so much sense to me. especially when I look at the graph and I look at the age onset of that starting decline of all those different hormone levels. Because I remember, just a bit of self-disclosure in my own life, I immigrated to Australia when I was, I think, 38. And by age 39, I noticed that quite a few symptoms, which I know you will both cover. But I never expected that this will be menopause at age 39. So I thought there's something seriously wrong with me, and maybe it's just the long flight and the stress of immigration.
Yeah.
So yes, I think once we get to all those symptoms, and I listen to what all those different protective hormones do, it makes so much sense. So that was very insightful and all really very helpful to me. So thank you. That was very good. So Rachel, from a psychological perspective, how does our hormonal journey influence our mental well-being?
I was just listening to what you were saying then, Ilze, about being 39. And I think it's a common misconception that people might think that menopause happens at 50. I think because we're told the average age is 51.
Yeah.
And obviously stats will skew that information, so it might be older or younger. But very often it can be a chemical menopause, it can be a hysterectomy, or it can be it can happen at any time. But when we're in our 30s, we don't ever expect that the symptoms that we're going through could be attributed to menopause. Absolutely. Definitely the drop off in melatonin, that's intense.
Yeah.
And we all know that sleep is a major factor in mood and energy and appetite. So even just looking at the melatonin without even the estrogen and progesterone, the fact that if we're suffering from sleep disorders, we are going to want to snack more, we're less inclined to exercise, we're irritable, and sometimes we'll just think it's just because I'm not sleeping well, or I've got small children, or so I guess from a psychological perspective, we can see it in the lifespan when we reach fertility, that we do have peaks and troughs of hormones, and we do have huge dumps at adolescence and puberty. They peter out, they come up again when we fall pregnant, and the progesterone and estrogen calms us down and makes us feel, I guess, probably the most psychologically calm.
That's right. Yeah.
In a lot of cases. And it's like the biological programming for us is that we live in a sophisticated society, but we still have these ancient hormones and chemistry running through us that we can't change. Even though we think we're smart and we know a lot about the brain, I can't say, hey, hormones, can you just come back a bit, because I don't like being old and tired and fat anymore. But we are programmed so that our peak fertility is early. We're supposed to procreate from that time, have a baby, and then for most of us in ancient times, we'd be dead by menopause, really. So it's about looking at that as a lifespan, because we're living longer, and how can we manage our energy now? What can we do to improve our energy? What can we do to support our mood? How can we ensure that we try and get better rest? And we still kind of, between the ages of 35 and 50, we are sometimes at the midpoint of our career, or we're paying off a mortgage and we've got financial stress. So it's kind of the peak time of stress, but also the peak time of erratic hormones.
That's right.
So I think the number one best thing we can do is talk about it. And I love that we're talking about it now. And having an awareness that it can happen anytime. Rather than it happens at 50. So if you're experiencing any of these things like sleep, mood, emotions, low libido, difficulties with relationships, difficulties in the workplace, that this could actually be a result of hormones dropping off.
And I guess that takes us to the next question about what are the common symptoms that you notice when clients make an appointment with you and come to therapy, and how that's linked to perimenopause, menopause.
Without swearing, we need to talk about rage, because
Yeah.
when I saw testosterone's in there, I'm like, oh, well, that's obviously where the rage comes from. But the progesterone is what calms us down, and the estrogen is what keeps our mood elevated. So it's kind of, when that drops off, I realized I suddenly had road rage. Yep. In my 40s, and I was like, what is wrong with me? Brisbane's not busy, but I'm just getting really angry and really sweary. So I think that's when I noticed it first for me. So I talk to people that come in, they might be presenting with, they hate somebody at work all of a sudden, whereas before they were fine with them, or their kids are really annoying and their kids are triggering them. Because sometimes if we leave having babies for a little bit later, we can often be at menopause. It's great. When we have teenage kids.
Yeah.
So they're getting a swathe of hormones and they're getting reactive. And we're also experiencing rage. So very often
that's the perfect storm.
Yeah, I will have my rage because that's unacceptable. You can't come home at 2 o'clock in the morning. But then I'll go and have a cup of tea and I'll come back and say, hey, sorry about that. Can we negotiate?
Yeah.
What time you come in? So some of the symptoms, rage is a big one that I notice. Mood swings, you know, and that can still be cyclical, can't it? It's even if your hormones are petering out, sometimes you're feeling great, and then a couple of days later, you can kind of really bottom out. Some of the things that come in that people might think, oh my gosh, I'm crazy, I need to see a therapist because I've got this rage, and obviously I've got bipolar, or obviously I'm feeling such big mood swings that I must be schizophrenic. Sometimes these can come up in menopause, they can be more obvious. But it's a really great time to look at hormones, and I'll often look at the age of a client and go, okay, I think I know how this is going to go. You know, and I think that's really important to, even if they're 36, 37, and they might think, surely it's not menopause, it can be peri. And by the sounds of it, and looking back now, I think perimenopause is more hardcore than
definitely
menopause, because menopause is just apparently the day when we stop having our period.
Yes.
And then we're menopausal for the rest of our lives. I did not know that.
And me neither.
I thought postmenopausal meant, oh, it stopped, I'm good now.
That's right.
It doesn't.
No.
It means the symptoms can back off a little as we age, but we're never actually postmenopausal, like post being over, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The hormones are just balancing out a little bit more. But as you say, the perimenopause, that's where we see all of these psychological symptoms.
Yeah, and
the
so
fluctuations.
some people might think, well, I think a lot of women will experience a panic attack and increased anxiety in their 40s and 50s. I certainly didn't. It took me by surprise because I didn't know where it came from. But with that drop in hormones, all of a sudden it's your ability to cope is lessened. So our stress does go through the roof, our anxiety can go through the roof, we can have really low moods and front up to a GP and say, well, you know, obviously I've got major depressive disorder, or so there's a lot of things that menopause can look like. Also, if we get forgetful or we lose words, there's actually a word.
That's such a big thing, that forgetfulness and losing words.
Brain fog.
That brain fog,
or lost words. And I wrote it down, right? I think
I lost the word.
I think it's called legolothia or something like that.
Yeah.
I thought I must remember that, but then completely forgot. So we do have gaps in sentences, and if we're in a managerial job at work, or we're trying to get something at the shop, so we walk upstairs and we're like, why am I here? Sometimes that can look like neurodivergence, or somebody might say, well, obviously you've got ADHD.
And I think that also leads to so much anxiety for clients when you notice your brain is not optimally functioning and you think, what's wrong with me? Am I developing early onset of dementia or something? So that in turn creates that vicious cycle of other psychological symptoms then.
Did you want me to talk about the 4 Ps?
Yes, please. That's such an interesting thing. You mentioned that you were going to touch on the 4Ps. So tell us, what are the
I
4Ps?
totally made it up just to remind me
No,
how
that's
to, I know
awesome.
there's 4Ps in psychology, but I made it up to remind me which were kind of the peak major, the key events in a woman's lifespan. So puberty is one, and that's when in ancient times, that's when as soon as you are fertile, you have children and you separate from your parents, or you stay in a tribe, but you start your own family. And that's often why kids, teenagers will go through that period where they're really resentful and angry with their parents and they don't like being told what to do, because they're programmed to start their own family and be mature at that age. So puberty, we get a hormone dump. Puberty often, for me, I see a lot of neurodivergent clients, and I'll often see girls at that age, because the hormones bring it all and magnify it. Pregnancy, the hormones are usually stable. Postpartum, they can dip. So after we have a baby, the hormones can just fall into a slump. But there's oxytocin from breastfeeding, which can elevate the mood again. And it's not only from breastfeeding, it's also from nurturing and the love that you feel for your children.
But I guess with that postnatal stage, that's also where the hormones drop. We have deprived sleep because we are nurturing a small little baby.
Yes.
So that in turn, I can imagine, would be a very it can sometimes be a challenging life stage as well.
And even though traditionally, old school, that's what women did, now that we have to balance our lives with work and parenting, it can be quite stressful, and it can feel, for me, I felt really unproductive when I had to stay home with kids. I mean, it's a joy and it's supposed to be wonderful. It's hard. It is hard work. And we do it on our own.
Yeah.
And we are tired, and nobody has really told us what to do or how to cope with every single scenario, and everything's unique. So postpartum can be a difficult time. And then I guess it's sometimes a longer period into perimenopause. But in that lifespan for women, we do a lot, I think. The progesterone is there for us to nurture and care for. It makes us do that. So whether you have children or not, you will still nurture and care for. So some people that I work with who don't have children, they work with animals, or they work in childcare, or they still have quite a nurturing role in their lives. But when that goes, you'll find women coming in saying, I don't care. I don't care about cooking my husband's dinner. I don't care about looking after my kids, because the progesterone is gone. And that's kind of our people pleasing. And sometimes women will get to perimenopause or menopause and say, stuff this. I want to look after me now. I've done I've cared for the kids and I've provided for the home. So sometimes it can bring up like an identity kind of reevaluation. So that's the 4Ps: puberty, pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, and the fact that we're living longer now. We have to work out what we're going to do with our time and repurpose it.
That's very insightful. Thank you, Rachel. When I listen to some of those psychological symptoms in particular, I do think that they make a statement that research indicates that a lot of women who present for psychological therapy in particular, going through perimenopause but not being aware that they're going through perimenopause, often present with burnout. And when we listen to all of these symptoms that you've listed already, that ticks the boxes often for a lot of people, a lot of women. Christina, from your perspective, what are the common symptoms that you notice when clients present to you and they go through that perimenopausal stage?
Yes, and so I guess in similar to some of those psychological symptoms, the ones that tend to be brought up in clinic with my patients tend to be more of that physical, the physicalities and some of those physiological symptoms that we see, and then also our biochemical symptoms, which we may see on some of our blood results as well. And a lot of those are to do with these fluctuations and this decline in our female reproductive hormones. And so I guess some of the main ones that I tend to see is starting with some of the irregular periods. We also start to see some changes in weight and weight distribution. And fat distribution tends to be one of the main ones of what I see a lot of patients for. And so what they often tell me is that I'm noticing a bit of weight gain, but it doesn't tend to be just anywhere. It tends to be more in that abdominal region.
That belly fat.
Yes, a bit of the belly fat, the abdominal fat.
Yeah.
And I guess from that hormonal standpoint, we know the reason why is that our estrogen is actually what distributes fat around the body. And so what it tends to do when we do have that estradiol is it'll distribute most of our fat to our breast tissue and to our hips and to our buttocks. Whereas when that estrogen starts to decline, we actually see some of those, the fat distribution going more into that abdominal region as well. We also start to see a bit of heightened stress, so things like our cortisol, and that can distribute fat around our abdominal and our visceral fat regions as well. So sometimes I have a lot of clients be diagnosed with something called fatty liver disease, and that's something, it's a visceral type of fat where we see some of that distribution attached to.
That's interesting.
Some other things that we tend to see going along with the brain fog is that glucose uptake is actually something that's a little bit less sensitive. And so what that means is when we're having foods as energy, a lot of the foods that we eat break down into glucose in the blood. And the brain is the biggest organ that utilizes that glucose. And so uptaking that glucose in the brain starts to become a little bit kind of foggy. It's not doing so as well as it once did. And so sometimes we can feel some of that tiredness, and we start to potentially seek out more energy dense foods or sweeter type of foods. You know, biscuits and all sorts.
Identify with that.
And so that tends to be something that presents itself as well. And a lot of people come to me and they say, oh, I can't stop snacking, or I just want something sweet. And it tends to be because, you know, the glucose isn't quite uptaking as well as it has been, and so we look for that instant energy. Another thing, I guess, from that biochemical level, we start to see some changes in our pathology. So when we do a blood test with our doctor, we can see changes in some of the lipid profile. So we tend to have more of those more triglycerides or higher cholesterol levels. We may have some sensitivity to our blood glucose. So sometimes this can heighten some of the results when it comes to our fasting blood glucose levels, or our something called our HbA1c, which is a diagnostic for prediabetes and diabetes. And then also some of the changes in our bone density as well. So depending on whether we have a DEXA or an ultrasound scan on our bones, we can often see some changes when it comes to that bone density as well. And then with some clients that I'll see, we'll see some changes in the thyroid function as well. And so most commonly tends to be underactive thyroid function, but that's not occurrence for everybody.
Okay. I'm also looking at some of those physical symptoms, hair thinning or hair loss. Yeah,
skin changes.
I noticed the hair thinning in my own life. My hair thinned on my head, but and stopped growing in other areas where
or began to grow.
Or growing more on the face.
Yes,
what is that?
Now I get all in the wrong place.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the hot flushes. Can you
Mm,
just tell us a little bit about that? Because
yeah,
not all women experience hot flushes. We don't
no,
necessarily experience it at the onset of perimenopause.
no,
And sometimes we can
yeah.
even experience cold flushes.
Exactly.
So tell us a bit about
So
that.
huge fluctuations when it comes to that hormonal balance typically tends to be from that drop in that estradiol, as we mentioned, will give us that onset of being too hot, and sometimes the rage can come with that aspect as well, and it's like, oh my gosh, why is everyone not feeling the temperature that I'm feeling?
Right.
And so they can be quite frustrating to
Yeah.
have some of that feeling as well.
Yeah.
And I guess another part to that is that we do tend to have a gradual weight gain as a result of our muscle loss. So muscle is the biggest metabolic regulator, and so it's a storage space for our blood glucose. And so when we are having that gradual muscle loss, our metabolic rate does start to reduce, and with increased maybe fat distribution and weight, it can also heat our body as well. It's a bit of a thermal effect. So
Okay.
yeah.
So we would love to hear from our viewers tonight. What are some of the, if you have to list one single symptom that impacts you most, if you can identify that you are going through perimenopause, or during this transitional stage of life that you feel has impacted you most. So please put that in the chat box. We would love to see what are some of those symptoms that you are all experiencing. For me, I can remember it was definitely the rage. I looked at the dishwasher and I thought, it would feel so nice if I can take all these dirty dishes and then just smash them on the floor and throw them out the door instead of packing them in the dishwasher. And my husband looked at me and he said, "Who are you? I don't know you."
Used to
What's
be so fun
happened?
when you had your
Yeah,
guests
it's so
around.
sweet. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so we would love to see what you are all experiencing. Are there any chats coming up? Let's see if we can see any.
Yeah,
The brain fog is definitely a big one.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
hair thinning. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
brain fog, hair thinning.
I didn't have night sweats, but I would have fierce overheating in the day.
Yeah.
I remember one time being at the traffic lights and putting the handbrake on and having to take off my full length boots. I had knee-high boots, and I was
wow.
like,
Yeah.
this is unbearable, and throwing them in the car.
Yeah.
My kids were just like, what the heck?
Yeah.
But it is so overpowering.
Yeah.
And I kind of wondered if it had anything to do with that our bodies regulate our child's temperature. You know how it works like that. I just thought obviously we don't need those hormones to regulate a child's temperature anymore. That's what I wondered, if it had anything to do with that. But
Yeah, and something else that you mentioned with the pathology results that you see, I noticed that I always had low cholesterol throughout my life. But as I entered perimenopause, all of a sudden that was flagged on my blood test results,
okay.
and that affected my cholesterol levels.
So this is
So,
what the biggest killers for women are: heart disease and dementia.
Yes, but all cause mortality. Yes.
And all caused by a drop in estrogen and progesterone.
Yes.
Also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you for everyone's contributions. It's great to see that it seems like brain fog really stands out. And definitely the flushes as well. There's a question: is there a way to measure levels of estrogen and progesterone through a blood test or another way? Would you like to leave that question for the end, or would you like to give a quick answer on that, Christina?
I think I'll give a quick answer. And we can definitely go through, some of the symptom management and go through, I guess, some of those dietary interventions and things that might indicate changes in those levels. But when we're looking to monitor and track, we can do so with the blood test, and it's we can look at some of those hormonal balances, so we can ask our GP to look at those. And I think it's a great initiator of this conversation. And so particularly what we've found in the research is the earlier of tracking where our reproductive hormones are, the better we are at kind of managing those symptoms, particularly through the perimenopause to menopausal stages. And there's a lot of research and support that we have from our healthcare providers when it comes to using of hormone replacement therapies, when that's necessary, when to cease some certain hormone replacement therapies because it may not be accurate for the timing and the stages that we are. But what we do see is with some of those therapies available that I wouldn't say they're newly available, but now with the different bioidentical types of hormone replacement therapies available, we're starting to see a huge impact in how women are experiencing these stages and experiencing the symptoms.
Yeah, it can definitely support their mental well-being so much when they get some of those supports.
Exactly. Yeah. And also not only their psychological well-being and their symptom management, but also health metrics.
Yeah.
And so we start to see some of those support things like our heart health and have those protective factors when it comes to our insulin sensitivity and risk of prediabetes and diabetes and risk of heart disease as well, and different cancers. Yeah.
Oh. All right, so let's move on. And Rachel, I'd like to ask you, what role does stress play in hormonal imbalance during perimenopause or menopause? And what mindfulness or psychological strategies do you teach clients when they come and see you for support?
I guess the role that stress plays is it does increase at this age, and our protective factors of the hormones managing everything nicely for us and calmly for us kind of disappear. So and also, as I said before, this is a period of our lives where we're really busy. Whether we have children or not, we're busy with our career, we're busy paying rent, mortgage. It's a financially stressful time. It's an emotionally stressful time, managing children, home, especially right now in the current global climate, but I'm not going to touch any more on that. But, it's stressful enough to just be female at this age. So what I've found is really helpful for me in my life has been meditation and yoga. And meditation is just really noticing being in our bodies.
Yeah.
Because as soon as we're in our body and we're mindful, we're not racing off into the future of all the things we have to do tomorrow and what we're going to cook for dinner tonight. And we're not going back into the past thinking, oh, when I was 20, I was so skinny and my life was so much better. And I'm just sad that that happened to me. And when we're in our body, we can only be in the current moment and we can only manage that. So anxiety and depression is high at perimenopause. So the work that I do, I run mindfulness courses here, and coincidentally, the biggest take up is some of them are in the group tonight, which is lovely. The biggest take up are women of in French, I think they say d'un certain âge, women of a certain age, which is 35 to 50. We're all sitting in a room and we're like, oh, thank God we're here, because we can just take some time to be really present. And so that's been a beautiful thing that I've been able to do at Zest, and I'm very grateful, Ilze, for you helping me, showing me how to facilitate. So mindfulness, breath is the best thing to come back to the present. And even if you're in a car and you're experiencing road rage or semi-trailers cut you off, you can't obviously meditate, but you can breathe. And that just resets that fight-flight instinct that we have, because we are an ancient brain and body. And if something happens that we think is stressful, our body just goes into panic. Our breath comes up here. our brain basically goes offline, and that's where the rage comes out, and you'll be screaming blue murder and you won't even think, right, I've got to get myself together, the lights have gone green and I'm on a freeway.
That's right. Yeah, and as you say, there's often a misconception that mindfulness means that you have to sit and do a formal meditation, but that's not true, because we practice and live mindfulness every day, and we can engage in a lot of those mindfulness attitudes any time in our life, whether you sit behind the steering wheel, whether you are even talking to someone. You can use some of those mindfulness attitudes of non-striving, trying to be present in that conversation, listening, rather than trying to already think about what's the next question that I'm going to ask, or what I need to go and do another task. Can they just finish chatting?
Because our body just thinks that's stress.
That's
and
right.
so the heart goes faster, and then the cortisol and the adrenaline are flying. And even though it's not real stress, like it's not a real danger or threat, we're just thinking about what we're going to do next. The body still carries on in that way. So breath is significant. Mindfulness is significant, and we can do it anywhere, even just being really conscious, eating our food. Rather than thinking, well, I've only got 25 minutes, I've got to neck this and then get back to a meeting. It's taking the time, being really present. The other things that I do to support anxiety, and we were going to do it before this session, but then we got all panicky about the tech, is I will teach tapping, which is emotional freedom technique, which is tapping on acupuncture points, and really saying the emotion that we're feeling. So I'm feeling anxious because I hate speaking in front of people. So anxious, 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 anxious. And by acknowledging the feeling, we accept it and we validate ourselves, rather than, oh, don't be an idiot, you're fine, everything's going to be okay, why are you anxious? So we really can sit with the feeling, and that's also a lot of work that I do with people, because we've become very quickly thinking people. And I think that I'm stressed. Maybe you feel stressed. It's in your body. We live in our brain so much, and we're racing with our thoughts and everything that we have to achieve. It's almost like, come back to the body now. Come back to the breath. What's going on? What are you feeling? And I've spent a lot of time talking people out of saying, I think I love him, or I think I'm lonely, to say, I feel. Because often we're told not to feel and don't be emotional. Right. And it's very important to acknowledge our feelings, validate ourselves, validate other people. And one of the nice things about connecting with the meditation group here is that you sit in that room and somebody's like, oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. And it's really, we don't sit there cross-legged and it's also a sharing group.
Yeah, and you teach psychological strategies of acceptance and commitment therapy, of dialectical behavior therapy, schema therapy, CBT, schema therapy. So there's a lot of psychological concepts that you also share alongside facilitating a guided meditation.
Yeah, so that's a really nice part of it, that there's a teaching component, and then at the end we relax, or sometimes at the beginning we have to change it up sometimes, because if people arrive stressed, we're meditating, and then we're going to teach hair loss. But yeah, I think that's a really important thing, that we talk about it, and that it stops being a taboo subject, and that we can talk to our friends about it. And even not just women, we talk to our partners about it, we talk to our sons about it, because if they have a comprehension of the emotional vacillation, or whatever it's called, that women go through, I think it's really important for them to understand and support us as well.
Yeah, and I even think of often just, those quick grounding techniques. That's part of mindfulness, that can also be such a great help, even in those moments when we have a hot flush and we think, my brain is frying, I can't function right now. And where we can just do a quick grounding exercise for ourselves in that moment, and it takes just noticing 5 things, and then we back online, and we can function again.
Because we like to spiral, we like to get stuck in our head.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. That was very helpful. So, Christina, I guess, where are we now in terms of my questions? Yeah, so in terms of diet and lifestyle, what role do hormones play in cortisol and stress management, and what nutritional adjustments can assist in supporting women's mental and physical health?
Yes, and I think that Rachel covered it off nicely, I guess, that increase of stress. And we spoke about how we genuinely do have an increased stress. You know, we have progesterone decline, which it tends to be a calming agent. But what we also have is when our estrogen starts to decline, we generally have an increased basal cortisol level. And so when we think of our basal cortisol, you know, but when we do have all of our estrogen, you know, it tends to be quite low. Whereas as that starts to decline, we actually increase that, and that tends to be chronic because it's that acute state of cortisol that's increased over time, which can bring up that the response of cortisol and the response of stresses overall. Another thing that we tend to see hormonally as an increase in that cortisol is a response to acute stress. And so what we might find is that, you know, at times that we may be stressed about something, if we have a cortisol rise, that's actually elevated when our hormonal changes happen during perimenopause.
That's why we feel it so intensely.
We feel it more intensely, and we have a higher increase. And then particularly if we're also experiencing poor sleep or have anxiety or any depressive symptoms, this can also elevate some of that hormonal responses as well. Unfortunately, cortisol is also something that does promote fat storage, and so we tend to notice some weight gain, or that distribution of fat starts to increase. Then I guess in clinic, what I do often find is a lot of women start to notice some of those symptoms and kind of rush to the closest diet. But what we can actually see through the literature is that dieting and restrictive diet approach, or unregulated eating, or perhaps periods of fasting, so not having regular meals, actually increases those cortisol levels. And so we start to see some of this cyclic approach to often leading to more weight gain rather than loss of weight, which was originally thought.
That makes so much sense.
Another thing that I guess we start to notice is for some women, some of our bowel disturbances do appear. So these can be things sometimes characterized as IBS, or often misdiagnosed. So it can be things like needing to frequent the bathroom more often, or it can also have that opposite effect where we're having periods of time of not being able to open our bowels. So that can be a result of that heightened cortisol as well. What we also, I guess, from the dietary standpoint, we can start to look at the things in clinic that I will tend to look at to really help support the diet and lifestyle. Some of these are in relation to cortisol, but then often in relation to that food and mood approach as well. So we'll start, I guess, with some of our things that we know that tend to reduce cortisol. But what we also find is these often overlap when it comes to some of those symptoms. So whether it's our psychological symptoms or physical symptoms, and when it comes to those mood and symptoms as well. So the first one being the regularity of meals, or not going too long without eating. So having regular meals, so 3 to 4 hours apart. A lot of the times I'll, for people that aren't used to eating so frequently, you know, I'll suggest to perhaps set up a timer and see how long we've kind of gone in between those meal times. And like I say to many women, it doesn't need to be you know, the same portion size at each meal, but sometimes it may be helpful in reducing portions, but having more of that frequency to kind of prevent some of that stress hormone response.
Which is so opposite to that intermittent fasting
Yes,
approach.
yes.
Hey?
Yeah.
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 So confusing.
Yeah.
It's very confusing, and we can definitely, I feel like that's a whole other
Yeah.
subject to explore.
We'll have to have another webinar on that one.
Yeah.
It comes back to the kind of topic that we were talking about when we were practicing this yesterday. It's like we're so habitual in our behavior that when we were younger, when people were saying eat 6 meals a day, eat 6 smaller meals a day, great, that's really great because I'm energetic and I'm rushing around. And now that I'm not as active, we don't really adjust our food because it's how we've always been.
Yeah.
And similarly, we don't always adjust our exercise because that's what we've always done.
Exactly.
But it's a really interesting time when they used to call it the change, right? Now I've been thinking about that and I'm thinking, well, it is actually time to change. It's
That's
time to
so
change
true.
how I sleep. I can
Yeah.
nap.
Mm.
I nap hard sometimes. I nap so hard.
No, I naps
it's
like a
okay.
baby. Yeah.
And it's okay. So we can
Yeah.
change how we sleep. We can change how we eat.
Mhm.
We can change how we exercise as long as it's just not happening at all. As long as it's something.
Yeah, small steps, and
yeah.
those habitual steps seem to take the most, make the most differences. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of the patients that I'll see tend to rush to extremes, and maybe they've been fed up with symptoms or fed up, and so we'll kind of rush a lot of the time and call it nutrition noise, and so rush to a diet or rush to fasting or rush to doing lots of different things without realizing how it affects us and our hormones, and sometimes those smaller steps, and changing kind of that portioning or how the distribution of nutrients in our diet can have a huge response as well. And I guess next would be the balanced plate. And so when we think about our balanced meals, it's about that distribution of the type of meal that I'm having. Is it a quality meal? And so when we think of one that's a quality meal, we think about having those key nutrients. So we start off with our macronutrients, which are our fats, our protein, our carbohydrates, and our fruits and vegetables, which give us those fibers. And so are we having that correct distribution at each meal time? So that we are giving ourselves a lot of those key nutrients for absorption as well. Moderating our carbohydrates is definitely one of the recommendations that I'm often making. And it's because what we do know is that those rapid moods and that heightened glucose spikes can often be a result of some of our simple carbohydrates or our sweeter types of foods. And so usually transitioning to something like more of our complex carbohydrates, such as our whole grains and things that take a little bit longer for the body to digest, but give us an extended amount of energy, is something that we often gear towards a bit more.
I like that approach in comparison to that all or nothing approach that I sometimes even notice in my own life, and that I see with a lot of my clients as well. We feel like carbs are bad, so I need to cut out all carbs altogether rather than just moderating and having healthy carbs.
And we do tend to find in females that's actually something, although we do have some, I guess we can call it ketogenic adapters, or people that can have a very low carbohydrate and seem to do okay. I tend to find this less adaptable in females. I tend to find that the high, it will raise cortisol, and we tend to be more moody, and it gives us an increase of symptoms, and often cannot be something that's sustainable. So changing that distribution is oftentimes what I find works much better with the majority of females that I do see in clinic. And I guess if we start to look at these into that kind of hierarchy of diets, if we want to go to the next
So
slide.
this is all the good stuff about
Good stuff.
those nutritional tips.
When we start to look at kind of that hierarchy diet and something, where's a starting point for the types of foods that we can be including, which will help regulate our mood, include some of these key nutrients such as our magnesium for sleep, our omega-3 fatty acids, which help our cholesterol levels, and those mono and unsaturated fatty acids, things like our tryptophan, which helps support our serotonin and those key cognitive hormones, which are in our protein foods. We really look at that peak of the Mediterranean diet, which we can see are, having a base of our whole grains, our fruits and vegetables as a primary source of our, that nutrition, particularly in that fiber and carbohydrate content. And then including proteins with some of those lean quality proteins, such as our fish and seafood, more often. And this is something that I tend to find that we steer away from. I know it can be it seems very complex, and that we need to go to fish markets and like all sorts of different fish, but even something like a John West can of tuna in your lunch, it makes a huge difference when it comes to that quality protein and those good fatty acids, and also the supporting of our calcium and the bone matrix as well. And then we start to look at the things that we maybe want to have slightly less of, and this is when we're looking at our heart health and the protective agents for our heart, it tends to be more of those saturated fats that we want to just be mindful of, and that we still include in our diet, but maybe not all the time. So for example, is some of our red meats, maybe a few times a week, including have a nice steak. Don't waste it in a bolognese mince or something like that. We can easily change that for a turkey mince or something that's has a little bit less saturated fats, and just enjoy a nice quality steak. So that tends to be, I guess, one of the greatest influences when it comes to some of those dietary habits. And I guess the last point is what tends to inhibit some of those key vitamins that supports us. And oftentimes it's an excess in caffeinated beverages. Sometimes we look at that for energy, and that
that's so true.
and if we're having too many of those, they can really kind of change the gut microbiome and inhibit absorption of certain nutrients. So I'll usually recommend trying to have 1 to 2 coffees a day and away from meal times. So maybe that's something that we have in between meals with a piece of fruit, rather than inhibiting the main meal absorption. And the same with wine as well, and dinner. So it has wine on here.
My habit. Coffee with breakfast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So having things like our alcohol is something that also can be had in excess, and so it's another thing that I'll usually make recommendations for, is that we can enjoy in moderation, and perhaps away from meal time, so maybe an hour before, an hour after, just to kind of help that nutrient absorption.
I can definitely hear moderation is the key.
Yes.
key word here.
So that's the Mediterranean diet there. So predominantly our plant-based foods, moderating some of those high energy or sweet foods or sweet treats, and then including more of the vegetables and fruits, and our whole grains as well. I think we're getting to an end of
our and thank you for sharing those tips, Christina. So maybe as we bring our presentation to a close, before we get to the questions, maybe one last question that I have for Rachel is maybe just how can we use the insight shared today to empower women to redefine their identity and well-being?
I kind of thought I'd run out of things to say, and I thought we covered it all. But
I do think you have covered a lot of it.
It is our thinking, and this is our self-esteem can drop, our confidence can drop, our sense of purpose can drop with our hormones. So if we carry on speaking in a negative way to ourselves and even to other people, we'll start believing that kind of dialogue. And we can manifest if we say bad things about us, we're going to feel bad. Even the body will slump if you say bad things about yourself. So I think I said to you the other day when I was sick, I looked in the mirror and I thought I look fat, old and tired. And if I keep up that mantra, then I'm not going to be motivated. I'm not going to have any purpose. I'm going to not bother with anything. So I looked at that script this afternoon and I thought, looking at where we are in the lifespan and our age and what's happening with our hormones, I just thought a better way to rephrase that is my body's changing to manage my hormones. I need the fat distribution to manage my
Energy,
teeny tiny
yeah.
hormones.
Energy as well. Yeah.
And I need to rest and nap more often.
Yeah.
So that I've got the energy to be productive. And I'm at a stage in my life where I can now pass on my wisdom and share experiences rather than think, well, I'm fat, old and tired and useless.
That's right. Yeah.
Which I would have been in ancient times.
Yeah.
But now I have to
Yeah.
work out, how can I be productive? How can I be useful? How can I contribute to society? And really enjoy the next 50 years that I've got left.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, it's such a growth opportunity as well. It is a transitional stage in our life, but it's also an opportunity to redefine ourselves, to find new meaning and purpose in our lives.
And not have to carry sanitary products everywhere.
Oh, yeah, isn't that a
and
great,
be able to wear white trousers. I mean,
Absolutely.
liberating.
Yeah.
Not to have a period.
Oh, well, ladies, from my side, I just want to say thank you. I've really enjoyed our discussion tonight and your contributions. It's been really valuable and insightful for me. I keep on learning. There's always just more and more to learn. So I'd like to hand over now to our audience and maybe transition to our questions. So we want to go through our chat box and ask you to maybe list one final question that you might have. And I'm just looking at the time, and we can potentially allow about 5 minutes for just going through a few main questions that maybe have stood out in our presentation tonight that we would like to cover.
Can see the first one in here, and if I can read it out, someone was talking about some of those symptoms of and it's one thing that we didn't mention, but it's definitely a key symptom. If I want to go back, is some of those body pains, back pains and stiffness, and I guess that's something that we didn't discuss, but it is often one of the physiological symptoms, because what we know, I guess, is estrogen is a lubricant for our joints. And so some of those initial symptoms can actually be a lot of the time shoulder pain or pains in different frozen shoulder, pains in some of those joints is often a signal. And so it is common to have some of those side effects, and can and I guess when we look at something to help ease that pain, right? We can start to, this is where we start to see about some of that medical attention when it comes to, our hormone therapies, and whether there's a support, or whether or not we have some natural remedies, or even the other types of mechanisms that we can utilize in the diet to help with those inflammatory symptoms as well.
Oh, thank you, Christina. That definitely helps understand that better. Rachel, do you want to just have a quick view and see if there's any other questions that stand
or
out?
Any from before? I don't know if we have.
Oh, look, with brain fog, I just write everything down. I carry an old school diary, and I'm not ashamed. I have to write everything down.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I'll have amazing flashes of historical memory that's totally irrelevant, or trivia. We remember silly things that we shouldn't remember, and we forget what day it is. There are some supplements you could take. I don't really want to talk about supplements right now, but I mean some major things that are helpful for sleep is magnesium, making sure you get enough vitamin D, which is getting outside or taking a vitamin D supplement. Yeah, there are some things that you can take to help with brain fog, but I mean, once you've listened to this talk and you look at it from a holistic point of view, if you're getting enough
There's
sleep, you're
psychological
eating well.
strategies as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's ways to link and remember things like the 4 Ps, which
Yeah.
don't exist, but
Yeah.
they do now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm mindful of the time and everyone wanting to get back to their families and having dinner. We want to say a big thank you to all of you who have joined our live webinar tonight. We really appreciate that you made the time to be here tonight. We will also be sharing the recording of the webinar. So if you want to go back and listen to some of the insightful tips that our presenters have shared tonight, you're more than welcome to do that. And then we also want to encourage you to contact our practice, Zest Infusion, if you would like to schedule an appointment with either Rachel or Christina or any other practitioner on our team. We have a wonderful team of highly skilled practitioners who are there to support our clients. So please feel free to contact us and schedule an appointment. You can also go onto our website and read some of the profiles of our practitioners and even book online to request an appointment. So please feel free to do that. And then lastly, the Mindful Moments group program that Rachel is facilitating. We have another group starting soon in July, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the ladies that's watching tonight is going to be overseas. So I was like, oh, can we hold off till she gets back? But it has to coincide with school holidays. So
Yes.
Yeah. So it'll be starting at the end of July.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we will be sending some information about that around. So if you are not on our distribution list to receive newsletters from us, please contact reception and let us know that you would like to be updated on any new events that we offer at Zest Infusion, so that you can be the first to sign up and register for that. It will be a program that's offered in person because we want to take that time out and connect with each other. It's also very affordable, equivalent to what you would pay for one psychology session. You get 6 mindful moments group sessions for the same price. So I think that would be a very affordable and great option for us to also share some of that knowledge with our community. So thank you again for everyone joining tonight. We hope that you've really enjoyed our webinar, and thank you for your active participation in the chat box. We appreciate that very much. And stay tuned for any upcoming news from Zest Infusion, and we wish you a very good night.
Good night. Thank you.